I don't know if Ted mentioned it. He said I was an expat. I worked for 35 years with the U.S. Forest Service, which is a federal land management agency. We managed, we still do, I don't, but the agency still does, 193 million acres of public lands. And I know 193 million acres doesn't sound much, but the way I used to describe it is it's twice the area of the state of California. So it's quite a big chunk of land scattered all across the country. I'd like to start these, so to explain why it is that we are, why the Forest Service is interested in the cultural resources. I'd like to start with these two pieces of legislation. I guess if I do my math right, this is the 55th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And even though many of you know the Civil Rights Act as the law that that ended segregation and did set up the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, etc. There is a part of the Civil Rights Act called Title VI that that says that all federal agencies need to ensure that their programs and their services are provided to the public, to all segments of the public, on an equal opportunity basis. So it's kind of like civil rights for the program side, not in addition to the employment side. So that's been on the books for 55 years, and I think the Forest Service is still struggling with getting that kind of off the ground and making sure that the Forest Service programs, and in our case, the public lands, are open to all segments of the population, including Asian Americans and everyone else. The other piece of legislation is the Historic Preservation Act, 1966. What is that? That's the 53rd anniversary. That compels federal agencies to be cognizant and inventory the cultural resources, the historic resources on their lands, and to preserve them as appropriate. I see Mike squirming in his chair because that's not all it said, but that's the main bottom line. So federal agencies have these statutes that compel them to get involved in this type of work. And I think to a certain extent, not fully realized yet, but the Forest Service has at least taken some small steps toward that, and that's what these projects are. So what I'm going to do in the next 5 minutes is just provide kind of a historic background of where this Forest Service 1882 partnership has, how it got established. So I would say that the godfather of this whole thing is a gentleman by the name of Dale Hom, who's actually sitting right there. Dale, raise your hand.
That's all I have here.
And it was black, too. Dale was working for the Forest Service, and when I met him, his story was, and he's worked all around the Forest Service in many different remote locations, Alaska, Eastern Oregon, Washington, et cetera, et cetera. So he's been around, as we used to say. And when I first met him, he said, in every place that I've gone with the Forest Service, there are some remnants, some historic remnants of Chinese Americans. And the Forest Service really has properties in very remote, isolated areas, and it's not, we don't have much presence you know, on the coast, on the East Coast or the West Coast, which is where, in current times, when you talk about Asian Americans, you think, well, they are like city dwelling people, but they, in fact, there's they were all over the western United States at least. And so Dale wanted to do something with that idea. He worked with this other gentleman, Ron Chu, from the Wing Look. Dale was in the Pacific Northwest at the time, I believe, and started a partnership which resulted in 1994, and I don't know, what is that, 25 years ago, a tour. It was called the Chinese Heritage Tour of the American West, sponsored by the U.S. Forest Service and the Wing Look Museum. And this is a historic site. Doc Day's cabin, who was a medicine, Chinese herbal doctor in Oregon. And really, what is it, John Day, Oregon, which is really kind of out there in the middle of nowhere. We brought this crew, mainly people from Seattle and some folks from the Bay Area. And, you know, they were just absolutely amazed that this is back in the 1800s. This guy had a fairly reputable medical practice at that time. In fact, I think I heard that he was the first, one of the first licensed doctors in Oregon back when they started doing that. Anyway, that was a tour in 1994. It was went from Seattle through eastern Oregon and up through Boise and Warren, Idaho. I think Warren, Idaho was Polly Venus's cabin. You know, these are areas that you don't really think that in terms of Chinese American communities, but there's all kinds of evidence. So, and these happen to be in and around national forests. There was a second tour in 2017, no, 2010. So a few years later, there was a second tour that was expanded and went all the way, went to some of the same places, but ended up in Nevada City. And here's a crew from the 2010 tour. That's Ron, and this is Aletta Ing, who's also with the Forest Service, who kind of took over the helm when Dale retired or went on to other things. This is Peter Frampton, who was a Forest Service archaeologist. I think this is at the Chinatown in Virginia City. And Fred also did some Passport in Time. I'm not going to go into that. But it's another program that the Forest Service did. And Fred Frampton did these Passport in Time, which is like archaeological digs on Chinese American settlements. We also, I don't remember this much, but the partnership between the Forest Service and Wing Look also won the Chairman's Award for the Advisory Council for Historic Preservation, 2013. I vaguely remember being there. There's Mike Kazar there. So it was recognized. So the next phase of this kind of exploring Chinese American heritage started in 2010 to the present. We had a partnership with the Chinese Historic Society of America, where we created a website of Chinese heritage sites in California. We were focusing on California, but we also have expanded that website to include the areas in the Pacific Northwest that Dale and Wing Look had explored. So here's just a smattering. The website, I forget, it has like over 50 sites that it has write-ups on. And, you know, everything from little areas in little mining areas to, it also has the big museums like Angel Island and a lot of cemeteries. And then, so that brings us up to the present, which was the next, kind of the phase 2 of the partnership with Chinese Historic Society of America, was this tour. And we have 2 people here that are going to talk extensively about the tour. So I will kind of stop there. Let me just tell you who the partners were that helped make this tour possible. I mentioned the Forest Service. They provided funding, as well as the Bureau of Land Management. The Chinese Historic Society helped with some information about the sites. And we also partnered with, Michelle is here, APIA HIP, Asian Pacific Islander Americans in Historic Preservation. That's pretty close. Okay. Michelle is the director, and she helped partner that, and they were having the reason why we had it in November is because they had their national conference in November in San Francisco. So the tour was kind of a little ancillary activity for the tour participants. So anyway, with that.